Welcome to Practical Access. I'm Lisa Deeker.
And I'm Rebecca Hines.
And Becky, I think you have a fun thing to remind us of. I think I'm going to need to take some of your advice today, is all I can say.
Well, fun is relative, Lisa. This is the kind of thing that you and I like to come upon. But today's topic is basically tied back to behavior, but this is a blog post titled "Lecturing Kids Does Not Help Them Learn." And I came across this blog post because I was trying to help a friend of mine who's been texting me saying, "Oh man, my 5-year-old my 4-year-old, he's going to be 5. I'm trying to decide about kindergarten and whether he's ready because I keep getting people at the school telling me one thing and another thing, et cetera." And so she was telling me how she deals with these minor problem behaviors and timeouts and things like that. And I was telling her about planned ignoring, Lisa, which you and I talk about all the time, this idea of, when something happens, you say, I'm not doing that now. And you don't reinforce the behavior at all. And you turn to something else. I see you're trying to get my attention. When you're ready, I will talk to you. And then you do something else. So we were talking about planned ignoring and all these things. So one of the problems she was having is that over talking, both, by everyone. So when a behavior occurs, especially with a younger child, and we just keep lecturing and telling them more and more and more stuff about their behavior, sometimes we forget that, first of all, younger children in particular, they're not abstract thinkers. They don't necessarily even know what you're trying to explain to them. But we all have this desire, and it's noted in this blog, we have this desire to impart all of this knowledge on our children, and we don't necessarily take into account how they're responding to it. So I was looking around for something simple from a parent perspective. I sent this to my friend. She sent it to her children's father so that they could try to get on the same page with managing behavior together. And the bottom line is, as we already know, lecturing does not work. And one principle to state about that is when we overtalk and when we tie everything to, oh, I'm really disappointed that you did this, I'm really disappointed about that. Now we're making it all very emotional. And we're really weighing our kids down with all of these feelings tied to what are sometimes really kind of minor things. And we're in fact making the child hate something more and more and more. So if your child comes home from school and you've gotten a phone call from that he hit somebody on the playground, and now you spend all afternoon talking about it, chances are your child doesn't even remember really what happened. You're making him feel really bad about himself or herself. You're not going to change the behavior because the child no longer associates that behavior with what's happening right now. And you're teaching your child not to love school. So there's a lot to unpack in a really short blog post, but it's relevant, I think, to a lot of us, Lisa.
Yeah, and as I looked at it, I laughed because, again, you and I both have a love of, the auditory differences of boys and girls. And, these are overgeneralizations I'm about to make, but it doesn't matter what gender a child is. The mean length of utterance at 4 is about 4.5 words in a sentence.
Right.
That, going, I don't like that you started to yell at your sister. And now you're, by the time you're into the 4th word, you're like, I don't like that. They're like, blah, 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 blah. So I always kind of joke that it's easy to get into the, for those of a little more mature, the Peanuts teacher who was the wah, 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 wah lady all day long. And one of the things that I like that she mentioned in the blog is your kid, there is no quota for how many mistakes you can make in life. I'm sorry, you have reached your quota this week, no more mistakes. So, what we know is the more mistakes kids make as young that are safe mistakes. Again, we got to keep our kids safe. That's very different than, doing something, dangerous. But the more safe mistakes they make, the better they are at decision-making as adults. And so sometimes lecturing them instead of letting them reflect is my thought. If they can only do 4 words, tell me what you did. How do you think that made someone feel? what more could you, or what could you do differently? Like those are short phrases. And I know you and I both are really big on coaching kids when they make dumb decisions. Guess what? Works with spouses, with parents, with neighbors, with friends. Again, lecturing somebody about what they did wrong doesn't make anybody feel better. But using short statements says, let me celebrate. And better yet, when there's statements about, what do you think you could have done differently? Then it's turning that into an empowerment statement instead of I'm in power and telling you what is wrong with you. So again, that's another thing I always think about when I get into the habit of lecturing once in a while.
I think it's really hard for any of us to resist as teachers and as parents. So in this blog, and it's under the it's psychdadphd.com. And I think we have the link, but he points out that lecturing is the anti-motivator and that it's counterproductive. So every time you're about to lecture, Lisa, remember that it's counterproductive. It actually often has the exact opposite effect, and it makes people stop listening to you. But the alternatives for lecturing that are listed here, and that I agree with strongly, set the limit and walk away. So that's pretty much the kind of planned ignoring we talked about, whether it's at home and you're using some kind of timeout, et cetera. But it's that idea of being consistent and implementing whatever your correction is. But some other things, you just mentioned a lot of questions that you ask. And he says specifically, the one thing not to ask is why. Because when you ask a child why they did something, they don't know. And they're going to say they don't know.
Yeah.
So, it's better to tell things as a story, maybe a parallel story about yourself that's happened. Talk about the emotions that led to the incident. Oh, it seems like you were frustrated, so X, Y, or Z might have happened. It seems like you're angry that your brother took the toy. Whatever it is that's happening, using the right language really matters. And you've mentioned in previous podcasts, don't expect changes overnight. So whatever it is that we're trying to do, we can't expect it to change right away. And we're the adults, and we're the ones who have to be 100% consistent. So when we try something, we have to remember to curb our own behavior to help try to change children's behavior.
When a kid is really struggling with something that you really just need to stop, don't have a conversation about it. Just the word stop. No, can't do that anymore. I mean, my son had patterns of OCD and, there'd be things I'm like, no, we're done with that. That conversation is over. And again, not because I was being mean, but often then I would try to replace that with something that was of interest to him. Hey, we're not talking about that cat anymore, but there's a great dog across the street. Did you see him? So that distraction technique, but lecturing about something that is just not going to change. It's just better to say, no, stop. Hitting is not okay. Stop. And then you can talk later about a social story. And I love that was part of his discussion, is having a narrative, a social story. But again, sometimes we just need to stop behaviors quicker instead of having long conversations. And I see that a lot, no offense to my wonderful elementary teachers, but remember 87% of all teachers in elementary are females. And I see that a lot with the little boy who's sleepy or the little boy. And instead of just making very clear parameters, which you and I are very good at, there's this conversation. And the little boy's like, look, you got past your forward utterances. I'm now thinking about the truck and the dirt that I'm going to throw next. So again, what we want to do is stop things that need to be stopped and not have conversations about them. Have conversations when we're teaching kids, but doing it in short utterances and making them have some choice, as we always believe, like choice is the biggest word.
And you mentioned short, a great friend and colleague of mine who's an expert in languages says that we have to put our strong verb first and have a very short command. Stop talking, stop hitting. And if we can change some of those really specific and small things, I think we can see some changes over the summer.
Yeah. And, if you've got another person in your house, ask them to watch you. It's a great way to say, can you give me some coaching? And, older sibling can even help parents who might be at home by themselves and they're working with a younger child. So again, remember, always phone a friend. It helps every time. I can't tell you how many times I have called Becky Hines when I was in a struggling moment in life. So, well, we're glad you could join us today. Please feel free to send us any questions you might have on Facebook page or on our tweet. Send us a tweet at Access Practical. Our Facebook page is Practical Access. Thanks for joining us.